Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode I'm taking a break from our normal interviewing format to do a Q&A episode. I posted on social media and sent a few emails out about a week ago asking for any questions that people would like to ask me. If you're not already following Dyslexia Life Hacks on social media, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and we're on Twitter at dyslexia_hacks. Please give us a follow if you're not already on there. I haven't read the questions that have come in. I've literally copied and pasted them into Word documents. You're getting my raw thoughts as I read them out loud. You may have to bear with me as I read the questions out loud because as a dyslexic person, reading stuff out loud is not my forte. And of course, I'll put links to anything we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. So let's get into the Q&A. Currently sat here at desk with coffee in hand as well, so we can have a relaxed conversation together. This is going to be interesting for me actually, because the podcast, as I see it, it's not really about me. It's about using Dyslexia Life Hacks and this podcast to highlight the wonderful people in this world. But let's dive into some Q&A and we'll hang out for a bit and see what happens. So first question, which come in via email from Martin. In a perfect world, how should employers think about hiring and retaining neurodiverse talent? The gut feeling I have initially with this is making the recruitment process more dyslexia friendly. And I haven't had to do it for my last few jobs, but I do remember sort of straight at uni, and at that point I'm 31, that all the psychometric testing and all of that kind of stuff and filling in the forms and bits and pieces like that make it quite hard work, particularly if you've got a website or a recruitment portal that won't let you upload documents yourselves. Because I don't know about anybody else out there, but I've got my CV written down, edited, checked it, got it proofed by other people, same with covering notes, to make sure it not only is the best reflection of me and gets me to where I want to be in my career, but also it is clear for other people to read and understand me. So then come onto an employer's website where you're having to copy and paste and mess around with formats to fill in their forms really doesn't make it tricky and quite a hindrance. So that'd be one of the main things I think. I know from my own experience and talking to some dyslexics, this is going to be episode 68. So I've talked to quite a few by now over the last sort of 3 years of the podcast. And, but I think, when we get to interview, being that myself, being able to convert what we know into words is really easy for us. So it's getting through the initial written stage of stuff and written exams and all that kind of stuff. I think also highlighting, and this sort of goes on to this person's question about retaining neurodiverse talent. You want to be a supportive employer for a start. You also want to show that the company makes it easy for neurodiverse people to flag up they get the right help. So I'm pausing here because I realised I've not let go of the shift key while typing QA into this document. So it currently says Q7A. Don't do perfect things in the background. But back to the question. I'd like to be in an employer and think, I'm dyslexic, and I can go on the online portal and go to the kind of your people's area or whatever the company calls it, staff talent area, and then go, neurodiversity portal is here, and then we can click through it and get very quickly to a place that let us know how the company wants to support it, what the process is. We all know we can go to occupational health, but if you're a new starter in a job and you're keen to make a good impression, you may not want to disclose what's going on. And you certainly don't want to be having that awkward conversation with your manager. Particularly if you're somebody junior. I kind of think, I started my professional career in my 30s after doing a technical career in my 20s. So I had the benefit of being just that little bit older when I would push for these things in jobs I had as a professional engineer. But, imagine being on an apprentice scheme and you're 18, just out of school. The whole world has changed anyway because work is very, very different to the school systems. A-levels and your first day of doing a high-level apprenticeship have got to be a very, very different thing. But what do? You're already overwhelmed by what's coming, and then you want to mention this thing, dyslexia, but you're not sure. So I think having a nice, simple portal that's easy to navigate through, that you don't really need to ask anybody, so you can at least get started down the road, and maybe you want to just, depending on how you feel, like you're all settling, you can have a read one afternoon, and then you might feel, right, this company likes dyslexic talent, wants to help them because they've got this easy to access, smooth process. And I think just taking the bumps out of the road would help. Right. So let's see what the second question for Martin is. What do you find difficult work? Well, apart from getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get in the car and drive. It is still, I do a job that leans into what I now realize is creative thinking, as well as my sort of 3D thinking and reasoning. So a couple of things I find difficult work. Short-term memory is not the greatest for me, and you can get some engineers who are just able to do sums and retain short-term stuff like that in their head really quickly. So I sit there with a pad. It used to always be a notepad and a Parker Jotter, but now it's a remarkable tablet because my employer is giving that to me because they are really supportive, which is great. And it's an absolute game changer in terms of this job. Actually made it a lot easier. With a slight tangent on that, I can use the Remarkable to split all the notepads and all the notes into separate pads, so to speak, for each project. So I can quickly navigate through, dive in. I was doing calculations something the other day and just mark things out, rub them out, write them around, change all the things. And it's a great tool for collaborating with some of my colleagues. Coffee's good this afternoon. So, but back to that kind of situation. You're doing a design review with somebody and they are able to mentally do the calculations. Some engineering calculations, mechanical engineering ones and electrical are all based on physics. So if you go back to basic physics for quite a lot of time, quite a lot of the skill of the job when you're doing mechanical assemblies is being able to work out how to simplify the system down to the thing you need to know, because it can seem really complex and overwhelming. I could do the mental maths, and even to this day, like I've done advanced Fourier series for my engineering degree, but 12 times tables and stuff like that is still very tricky. And maybe one day I'll go do a maths course just to get that basic arithmetic quicker in my head, because it would be helpful. Sat on my fingers counting stuff and bits and pieces. But, having said that, I'm never more than 2 seconds away from a calculator. So that kind of stuff, and just retain that in short-term memory. So I have to pad things down while people are saying stuff. So that's one thing I find really difficult work. Another thing would be some of the paperwork forms. I'm lucky enough to be in a job with a manager that understands I'm dyslexic, and it's a job that isn't too paperwork heavy. But yeah, and I can do it. I've done it on previous jobs, written work instructions how to build stuff, done detailed analysis of previous designs and why my design goes. I can do it. And it's a really interesting thing. And it'd be interesting to see if anybody else out there has the same kind of thing, that when the pressure's off, I tend to find it more of a struggle. It's almost like the having a little bit of pressure on kind of focuses me and just drives me forwards. So I'm fine with stuff in Word and like where all the tools are on, but recently I was filling something in and they'd used an Excel sheet with all the boxes in on a grid system, because it kind of makes sense from a visual point of view, but I'm sort of there plugging away, and it's some of it's a lack of confidence in my point as well. I'm confident with the engineering stuff, but in a new bit where I'm stepping into something new, actually having a little bit of pressure on, I guess, stops the voice of low confidence coming in. So that would be some of the two things I find difficult work. It's short-term memory retention, people who are able to then do all that, to kind of how to manage that, as well as filling in forms, particularly on odd formats, like if they're in Excel or something. What's this? 3 questions. He got keen. What strengths does dyslexia give you that your employer may not understand the value? Oh, now that is a good question. What strengths does dyslexia give you that your employer may not understand the value? I think it's a lot to do with the verbal reasoning and visual skills. I'm doing a job that is very, very visually focused. And I think sometimes you're explaining something to somebody and you realize that it's really hard to convey what's going on in my mind. And maybe slightly my personality, I do like slightly pushing the envelope of, I don't want to be just in work repeating what somebody else did before. I do like to kind of, and not in a bad way. I think I always try and drive for engineering excellence and process improvement and strive to make everything as good as I can. But I will likely think differently to the person who's done it before. So I think that kind of, I believe it's a strength, but sometimes telling people that, you can just see the design, just trust me with it. Because, I can see it, but I might need a couple of days to actually get it on the screen in CAD to a point and mature it to a point where I'm able to present it to other people and demonstrate what the benefits of this approach are. It's an interesting thing. You come out of some meetings, you're talking to people, they're like, some people get it and other people you're looking at and they're like, no, I need to demonstrate the sport. And I think using that visual skill gets you ahead, but then it's having the ability to sort of present it to other people that may not be able to see it. I hope that answers your questions there, Martin. Let's have a look. So Devon has submitted a question. It's like a longer question. So you've had so many great guests in this podcast, and you always focus on so much on their stories. If you could interview anyone alive or dead about their story, who would it be? And what would you ask them? Whoa. Who would it be? Let's see. Alive. Let's go for both, alive and dead. I'm trying to think of famous dyslexics. So let's keep it on dyslexia theme rather than just give me 11 books that I'd sit spinning on the spot for ages like I am at the minute, trying to think of people. Alive, I'd love to interview Lewis Hamilton. For two reasons. I'm a huge motorsport fan and I grew up around motorsport. My dad used to race motorbikes. I was into motorbikes all the way through. Massive F1 fan through the early 90s. I have childhood memories of watching Nigel Mansell win the FW14B, then Damon Hill in the Schumacher era, which was a Hull fan at the time. And then, bike racing is my number one sort of love when it comes to motorsport. But Lewis is dyslexic, and I always wanted to race F1 cars as a kid. And I'd be just fascinated with how dyslexia works at the top end of sport and how you push it into racing a car. Now, long-term listeners to podcasts will know that I had Ben Hurst on before. He's a racing driver, and he was talking about how it will be in his level, and he's at the level where he's good enough to not have to pay to run his own race team or race cars, but obviously not up to the full professional level of motorsport like Lewis is. It was really fascinating. And I'd like that as well, the balance in the podcast, that you could interview this massive celebrity like Lewis Hamilton and then point people back to somebody who's somewhere else up and coming through the ranks and show the difference between not only how dyslexia works at that high-end elite level and both sportsmen, but have the balance too. I like that idea. I like the idea of the podcast having a balance, even if I interviewed somebody of high profile like that. We got somebody else that balances it out. But you imagine, like Jackie Stewart, F1 driver, used to say that he was ahead of the car all the time, and that just sounds like dyslexic visual thinking and diving into how you set up a Formula One car and how, particularly Lewis at the height of his powers, how he was able to do things with like drifting cars in the corners and stuff. I'd love to ask him about his pole position lap at Silverstone on his first year F1, where he gets the end of the hanger straight, which is 200 mile an hour in an F1 car, throws it in right-handed sideways and slides past the curb to hit the apex. That was a man out there deciding he was going to get pole position or he was going to crash the car doing it. And he got it. And it's like, how do you stay that much ahead of a car? How does dyslexia allow you to stay that much ahead of the car? Now, somebody dead. try not to go cliche, because initially I thought Steve Jobs. Not that I use an Apple iPhone, but not that I'm a huge Apple fan person. Sort of worship Steve Jobs, but more about the iPhone, because the amount of people I talk to who are dyslexic can use. Well, we all use smartphones, but quite a lot of us seem to use the Apple smartphone, and I don't know why that is. It might be selection biased on my part. Like maybe people who use iPhones have mentioned Siri more often than Android users mention Google. Who knows? But what a dyslexic thing like that. That user interface that really shifted mobile phones away from something that was a bit of a nightmare for dyslexics. Anybody who's old enough remembers the T9 typing away on keyboards and predictive text to this kind of glossy, visually based device that we keep building more stuff in. Like I've always got a companion in my pocket that would help me with anything. So that'd be really interesting. And that's what I think. I'd like to ask about that and how we drive technology. And what was his thinking? How was his dyslexic mind coming up with that? Because it does sometimes feel like you look at a modern smartphone, particularly when it first came out, and that's very much in another life. If it's thought of by somebody else, would it have been, hey, have you seen this assistive technology tool? But it was not. It was a mainstream mobile phone. So as much as Steve Jobs is a very cliche answer, I don't want to interview him because he's the founder of Apple. I want to find out how that massive shift change device that really helped us out. So thank you very much for submitting the question. Let's go on to the next one. Right, the next one's from Kirsty Heap. So these could be, if you've listened to an episode that goes out before this one, Kirsty Heap's a bit of a character. So let's see how this goes. More coffee first, though. Right, her first question. How do you feel about dyslexia? Try reading this again, eh? Whose bright idea was it to read out loud raw? But we'll go from there. Okay. How do you feel your dyslexia has helped you with your job? Let's try this again. Do I leave this in the edit? Anyway, so Kirsty's first question is, how do you feel your dyslexia has helped you with the job you do? That's very much similar to Martin's question of the strengths of dyslexia. It seems like, as I'm trying not to read ahead because I want the raw response, but quite a lot of these really focus on dyslexia, don't they? But as I said earlier with Martin's kind of thing, it's the visual thinking. It really is. And I'm moving into management now. I like to manage a small group of people. And I'm hoping, and I haven't heard any negative feedback yet, but who knows, that understanding what it's like to struggle through things and understanding that you're not always on top of your game and sometimes you need stuff back and forth. And it varies. I'm always a lifelong learner, and I devour non-fiction audiobooks on how people think and various things like there's no tomorrow while driving the car. So I'm hoping that kind of spills through, and I do wonder whether that's also being dyslexic. You just kind of I feel I'm always looking for a better way of doing things. Could be the engineer, to be honest. A better way of doing things and pushing through to make things better. So it's great when you're talking to somebody and maybe they're getting a bit stressed with the workload on them, and you can suggest some concentration tactics and things like that, particularly with people I've talked to on the podcast where you've learned stuff from them. You can cascade it down, and just my own experience. So just to add another sort of, I guess, just go slightly different direction from the previous question on this subject. But I think I'm thinking that just how using the pattern recognition and trying to understand how people kind of work and go together. Right, her next question. What do you feel there? I'm doing well at reading these questions. Hey, I got through four before I started saying them wrong. What do you feel are the challenges you encounter with the role you do, and what are some of the strategies used to support you? So I've already covered challenges, so let's go into strategy. So we said about the remarkable tablet. And I was genuinely surprised when A, I got offered it, and B, when it come, how much it helped, actually. I'm quite a few years in my career, and I've always used A5 notepads. That's what I've used. And ideally, if they got the rings down the side so they're big enough to fit my pen down one side, that is great. Getting the remarkable is just something else. Like it. I was genuinely surprised how it changed things. Like having something you don't have to keep drawing lines to, crossing things out. You can change the paper to whatever you want for the task you're doing. Rub things out, add things in. The only thing I'm finding with it actually is it's kind of an interesting thing, and see if anybody else got this experience, is that where I'm in like a meeting or something, or what I tend to do in a meeting is just scribble things down so I can remember, retain it and then we'll write a better wash up afterwards, is that I'm sat there because I can now edit and rub things out on the fly. I'm sort of rubbing things out the way, the spelling or whatever it is I've done wrong, correct. And it's like, no. Now it's time to crack on. We'll fix that later. And it's kind of that thing with, the way to remember trying to have to train yourself out of doing things on Microsoft Word where you see a red squiggly line and want to go back and delete and edit it. And it's like, no, don't do that. Get everything down on paper and then we'll sort it out. And I'm finding myself tripping over that trick with the Remarkable as this new piece of kit. Like, I can just rub things out as I'm going along, but I'm in the middle of a meeting. I just need to write it down and carry on and be engaged. So that's one of the key strategies, but quite a lot of strategies use. The major one is picking a career and picking the arm of the career that suits me. Like, I love what I do. I really enjoy it. And I feel that some of my dyslexia students help along with the work. So doing that. And then having the right support. So boss knows I'm dyslexic. Gone and done the occupational health assessments, so they see all that. And it's the first job I've properly pushed it on as a sort of sign of my confidence with dyslexia has gone up, which there's no hiding. Thanks to the website and this podcast, there's actually been a bit of personal development for me as well. So having the confidence to push it and being at the level I am in my career to be able to feel comfortable doing that. But that's kind of my main strategy. So job is not doesn't hugely lean into my weak points that often. So there are still a few things I'm learning. I'm less than a year into this current role. And I think there are a few things I might want to build onto it as I can. And then other things I tend to find, sleep. Being somebody who can't necessarily drift off to sleep very well, but getting enough sleep in is huge. Just brains on different levels. There's no sort of drifting off in the afternoon. I can find a lack of sleep. I'm either tired and kind of a bit distracted at work, or just quote unquote more dyslexic at times. Getting enough sleep in and having a calm environment as well. Like I have the desk laid out. I'm not stiff with this because it needs to be calm. It doesn't need to be perfect. If I make it perfect, it has to be in a certain way, and be too rigid with that, then that becomes stressful because trying to get away from the rigidness, it's not calming. So having a calm environment, I have everything set up so it's easy to leave the house in the morning. I know where everything is. I know where car keys are. I know where my work clothes are, and everything else planned out the night before, just to keep stress levels down. Do a little bit of stretching and bits and pieces in the morning, which helps with calmness and stops me slowly turning into the Tin Man as I start to seize up otherwise. But that'd be, it's a couple of the strategies I tend to deploy, as well as all the tricks on the website. Okay. Now, Kim has submitted a question via LinkedIn, so this is a long one. So bear with me as I read this. I'm interested to know if other dyslexic people arrive at a creative solution by visualizing the results in their mind's eye before creating work. For example, when I conceive an art exhibition, I see all of the artwork in my mind before picking up a paintbrush and a camera. Sometimes the detail is not yet present, but the general feel and form is clear. And is this typical for other dyslexic creative? Most definitely. Oh, yes. It's something I kind of would like to explain better, I guess, to people who don't think like this, because we don't. I tend to focus on the visual thing because that tends to be where I lean into, and it's something I've honed quite strongly for my career. So I'm almost getting specialized in that kind of thing. But how do you explain it to somebody who's non-visual? That's the kind of interesting thing, isn't it? Using the visual creative solution, like, I can close my eyes, walk myself through how something goes, how things go together. And like this particular example from Kim, where she's saying about artwork in an exhibition and how it is laid out. Yeah. I actually used this tactic when I was talking at Dyslexia show last year and the year before. I would go early in the morning before it opened and walk round the show, then round the area that I would be presenting from, sit in a couple of seats, maybe watch the talker if there was an opportunity, then stand on the place I'm going to talk to. And then lock that in my mind and visualize me talking there. I could then, 8 hours later, go to my hotel room and talk through the presentation as if I was doing it in the right place. I'd use sort of my mind's visual skills to put me there. Now, one thing I tend to do when I'm practicing talks is pace up and down, which is fine when you go to the bedroom, you can do that in. But when you're limited by the stage, you can't sit and pace up and down because you will fall off the end of the stage. So having that locked in my mind, I start then presenting, using bits and pieces in the room, whatever that might be, the desk or whatever, to kind of mark it out. And then we'll walk around and do the talk and use the visual skills that way. So I think having the visual skills really, really helps. And I think it's quite typical with lots of dyslexic creatives, just being able to see it. Even at work, I'm saying it's in my mind. I just need to get it out of my mind with the CAD, particularly if I'm learning a new CAD package. Like, the hard thing is not knowing what to do, it's knowing how to get the package to do what I want. One interesting thing, actually, this gets me thinking, is what happens when you get a little bit kind of, I don't know if overstimulated is the right word. But you've got so many solutions. Sometimes it's hard to grab one and go with it. Like, it's something I have to train myself to do, is grab something and go with it, rather than kind of almost spinning the spot, go round and round and round of what I could or couldn't do, and how this would be fancier than this, and how this would be fancier than that. So I wonder how other dyslexics kind of fight that out. But for me, a bit of time pressure and a bit of focus, and having something else to bounce off with, back to sort of what strategies you use as the previous question. Having somebody to talk things over with, somebody you trust and understands the thing you're going with as well. But I hope that helps with your answer. I realise I waffled on about other things as well. Believe it or not, when I thought this episode would be a good idea, I expected me to rattle through everything in 5 minutes, because I don't necessarily like talking about myself that often, but here we are, and we're quite a few minutes in at this point. So let's have a look. So Joe submitted by email the next question. You said when we talked, yes, this is Joe Reese, previous podcast guest. So you said when we talked, you got diagnosed young, but it didn't make much difference in terms of how you felt about growing up. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice or tip, knowing what you know now about dyslexia, what would that be? What would I give my younger self advice? Wow. Not the hugest fan of reflecting back on my younger self, to be honest. So, do you know what? Apart from the obvious thing, you stop eating so much. What I give about dyslexia, I think one of the things I would say is you got to stop trying so hard to fit in. Like, I'm a tall adult. I've always been a tall kid, so as kids like to do, they'll always pick on people who are not near the sort of mean average, won't they? So being tall and a bit podgy kid was never going to be fun anyway. And not being that confident kid either. Like, just go with it, embrace it, It doesn't matter if you don't fit in. It doesn't matter if you need to use colour filters on paper, which I refused to use because the kids would have had a field day with that one. And actually, as an adult, I realised the colour filters don't necessarily work for me, but they wanted me to use them for a little while to see, and I just refused. I'd use it for homework at home, and that was it. I hate homework. But I think it's wrong with it. Like, we just have to be braver in being away from the norm, because when we're adults, then being away from the norm is kind of interesting. But I think that'd be the biggest thing I'd give my advice. I'd go with it. Embrace everything. Use as much of dyslexic help as you can. Stop fighting it to be normal. Okay, next question is from Val. How has being dyslexic been an advantage in any way? Oh, it's a huge advantage in lots of different ways. Now, we've covered quite a few here, and kind of in the workplace, I guess. Now, maybe I lay too heavily on the visual thinking side, but it has. And talked with other people during the podcast and how it shaped our life and personality. Now, I wouldn't want anybody to go through the kind of the difficulties and the struggles with it and all that stuff at school where you're trying to fit in the system doesn't work with you. But there is a level of grit, and for me, a bit of a relentlessness that comes with that. I think I pushed a huge advantage when I went to university and got to my degree. And it just shaped me as an adult. There's just this level of keep pushing that I'm always doing. I'm always moving. I'm always driving things forwards. I'm always pushing. Now, that's not necessarily dyslexia being an advantage, but it is an advantage that I've gained and the work ethic I've gained because I'm dyslexic. Other advantages, obviously, there's a whole book called Dyslexic Advantages that I've read, and all the M strengths and I strengths, but I think if we park visual thinking to one side, because we've covered that quite a lot already during this recording, I think quite a lot of the sort of the dynamic thinking, really, the being able to piece things together from 2 to 3 stuff. One of my strengths can be is that I can be told enough information that I can get on with it and go with stuff. I don't necessarily need everything to be particularly laid out in front of me. And I think that's some of the dyslexic dynamic reason pulling stuff together. And I'm kind of in a funny position where I read instruction manuals and author them. So there is that. But I feel like that's kind of what my mind is able to do with fragmented information does surprise sometimes. And I think dyslexia makes me a fast learner. I'm very quick out of the blocks to the first 75%. I may not be the best optimizer at the last bit, but out of the blocks I'm reasonably quick. And I think that's the huge dyslexia advantage, the speed of the learn. Okay, so the last round of questions come from Leonie. Let's have a look. What would your top piece of advice be for children at school with dyslexia? Oh, back to the school. Now, easy for me to say now as a 39-year-old, but you got to embrace it more. You got to lean into it. Like, your mind may not work in the way that other people's do, and currently they're at school with the way current school is set up, it suits them. But don't make them feel like you are abnormal, different, or at a disadvantage. It's just where you are at this minute. You know, you could do all sorts of fun analogies if you want, but I think just remembering that dyslexia is a different, and it's a different way of thinking, a different way of seeing the world, and actually, as you go through life, because school is about the only time in life that everybody does the same thing at the same time. You can start finding things that suit you better rather than what you're currently in now. So that's it. Just keep going. Right. What's the next question? What has your biggest challenge been? I think my biggest challenge is going back to uni. Like at 26, just giving everything up and going back to uni. It was all in, which I needed that pressure. I mean, I'm in awe of people who managed to do part-time stuff, so that was not where I was at the time. I needed the pressure. I needed the I'm all in, this has got to work kind of feel to it. I didn't want to go and apply for a job at a lorry garage as a mechanic with my tail between my legs. Like, yeah, I went to university and didn't get anywhere with it. But I spent the first year waiting to be found out that I didn't belong, that I wasn't going to do this. I was joining the ranks of academic. I'm not academic. I'm not smart. I'm smart at fixing engines, but I'm not smart at this academic stuff. And there I was, just barring through it. And that's, I think, the biggest, coming out the other side of it with a master's degree and all that crazy stuff, and where my career has taken me since then is just nuts. But that would be my biggest challenge, is doing that. I think then my sort of, just to expand this out really, is second biggest challenge really is talking about being dyslexic. Like, yeah, here we are, end of December 2023, and I'm quite happily, candidly talking into a microphone, pushing this podcast out to thousands of people about what I think about dyslexia. You wouldn't have got me at 35 doing that. I might have been confident at 35 about most things, but I wouldn't have sat here and done this kind of thing. I hope that answers it anyway. And then last question for the only, which is also the last question of this Q&A set. What is your favourite thing about having dyslexia? Oh, my favourite thing about having dyslexia. All the great people I get to meet. Through the dyslexia world, it's been great talking to all these people via this podcast and dyslexia show and stuff. God, that's such a cliche answer though, isn't it? What about me personally? What have I? Classic deflecting. Everybody else is great, and I just turn up. No. What else have we got? Well, I think it's just having a mind that sort of works in the way mine does. It's great being able to pick things up and see the world as it is, being able to disappear into my mind with stuff and think things through and visually plot things out. And the speed of learning just bowls me away all the time. You can rapidly come up with stuff. It's quite good fun. I mean, it used to, when I was young, like 20 something, it was insane, and I really didn't know what it was. It's like, hey, I picked this job up fast. It still happens now, but the jobs I'm doing are more and more complicated. They just need more and more time. And there's lots of other things going on in my life as well. And I just think the sort of favourite part of that is just the whole thing. Like, it's very much, it's how my life looks. And it's the reason my life is like it is. And I wouldn't want to change any of that. So I guess, in a kind of maybe slightly vague answer, the favourite thing about being dyslexic is how it shaped me as a human being. So I want to thank the people who went to the effort of submitting these questions. It was kind of a bit of a spontaneous thing driving home from work one day, like, I'm going to do that. Very inspired by a podcast I listened to by Tim Ferriss recently. He was drinking during it, alcohol. I didn't think we'd do that. That might be messy, me reading questions out. But I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to do that, and remind everybody else who's listening that thanks for coming along and listening to this and this whole journey, and how great it's been the last sort of 2 to 3 years of Dyslexia Life Hacks and 2.5 years of Dyslexia Life Hacks show, where it's reached hopefully a lot of people, and I talk to people and they get a lot out of it, and I'm really happy that that's how people feel about it. So remind you again that we're all on multiple platforms, Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn. And that just leads me to thank everybody for listening, and I will see you in the next episode back to our normal interviewing format. And goodbye for now.